I want to talk about Florida here. This is Florida is cracking down. This is from the DC Patriot. All right. This is the Florida governor introduced a tough new law to protect police and punish rioters. This is something that I feel was needed a long time ago. The governor of a critical battleground state has shown what true leadership is with a new legislation to crack down on Democrat-sanctioned rioters and to protect police officers. In a strong statement that Florida is not going to tolerate the sort of organized mayhem from criminal rioters that have plagued other areas, mostly the Pacific Northwest, a series of tough new measures have been introduced by Governor Ron DeSantis. Speaking at the Polk County Sheriff Office, DeSantis made it clear that Florida is not New York, Portland, or Seattle, and that those engaging in the peaceful protests that have terrified helpless citizens elsewhere can expect to be hit with severe penalties. The Combating Violence, Disorder, and Looting and Law Enforcement Protections Act calls for stiff penalties against those harassing citizens, destroying property, and striking law enforcement officers, including with projectiles. Now, I actually have. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Here we go. So this is it right here. The Combating Violence, Disorder, and Looting and Law Enforcement Protection Act. So number one is new criminal offenses to combat rioting, looting, and violence, and I'll read them here for you. A, prohibition on violent or disorderly assemblies. Third-degree felony when 7 or more persons are involved in an assembly and cause damage to property or injury to other persons. B, prohibition on obstructing roadways. Third-degree felony to obstruct traffic during an unpermitted protest, demonstration, or violent or disorderly assembly. The driver is not liable for injury or death caused if fleeing from safety of the mob. C, prohibition on destroying or toppling monuments. Second-degree felony to destroy public property during a violent or disorderly assembly. D, prohibition on harassment in public accommodations. First-degree misdemeanor for a participant in a violent or disorderly assembly to harass or intimidate a person at a public accommodation, such as a restaurant. E, RICO liability. RICO liability attaches to anyone who organizes or funds a violent or disorderly assembly. That's a pretty big one right there.
Oh my goodness. That is not just pretty big. That's huge.
No, you're absolutely right. That's actually huge, because what's that saying, if someone is funding the violent or disorderly assembly, or maybe, paying their bail to get them out.
Soup kitchens for Black Lives Matter and Antifa?
Granted, that was Colorado. Now, this is specific to Florida, okay? I mean, right. I mean, Florida is definitely a little more specific here. So let's see here. I'm going to keep reading, though. That is huge. Number 2 on the list is increased penalties. A, mandatory minimum jail sentence. Striking a law enforcement officer, including with a projectile, during a violent or disorderly assembly equals 6-month mandatory minimum jail sentence. That means they can't get bailed out really quickly. They can't just be released back into general public, because there's a minimum. You're in there. If you strike a police officer or throw something at them, it's a felony. It already was a felony. But to be just released back out, that's what's happening out there. All right, and then B, offense enhancements. Offense or a sentence enhancements for 1, throwing an object during a violent or disorderly assembly that strikes a civilian or law enforcement officer. 2, assault and battery of a law enforcement officer during a violent or disorderly assembly. And 3, participation in a violent or disorderly assembly by an individual from another state. So if you travel to Florida thinking that you're going to join in on some Antifa activities, you're in for some hurt. And then we got the third one on the list.
Cross those state lines.
Yep, exactly. Citizen and taxpayer protection measures. A, no, quote, defund the police, unquote, permitted. Prohibits state grants or aid to any local government that slashes the budget for law enforcement services. B, victim compensation. Waives sovereign immunity to allow a victim of a crime related to a violent or disorderly assembly to sue local government for damages where the local government is grossly negligent in protecting persons or property. C, government employment benefits / benefits. Terminates state benefits and makes anyone ineligible for employment by state and local government if convicted on of participating in a violent or disorderly assembly. And D, bail. No bond or bail until first appearance in court if charged with a crime related to participating in a violent or disorderly assembly. A rebuttal presumption against bond or bail after the first appearance. Now, those last four are a little... They're
iffy. I think
I am a little apprehensive to say I like those because I don't know if I necessarily agree with those. This is borderline getting on the authoritarian side of things, and I don't like that. Okay, you know, there's now I don't the first half of that I'm like, all right, this seems like this seems legitimate. You know, they're protecting basically everything that's gone on in the past, all these riots, all these burning down buildings, ripping down statues, blocking and breaking into cars that are just trying to go home. They like, you know, yelling at people walking out of the White House, an old couple screaming at senators, like all these crazy things that I've seen that have happened over the past few months. A lot of this would have prevented that. Look, I'm all about protesting. Protest. It is in our Constitution that we are allowed to protest, okay? Peacefully. Peacefully protesting is allowed. Legally, you can peacefully protest all day long, whatever you want. But getting in people's faces while they're trying to work, just go out and eat at a restaurant, which we've seen in, Texas, in Houston, they were doing that. In, I think in Philadelphia. It's countless different places we've seen this. People are just antagonizing people. And what is that doing? We talked about it. They were doing that back in 1876.
Yeah.
If you want to have, like the black people free, we're going to go beat you up. That's what they were doing back then. If you don't agree with us, if you think that the North won and the North is on the right side, we're going to intimidate you and bully you. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. Well, that's what they're doing.
They intimidated and bullied their way into a constitutional crisis where then they compromised to get Jim Crow laws so that they could have it as normal, so that they could continue doing whatever the hell they wanted in the first place. Right.
And that is exactly happening again right now.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
The same thing, different coat of paint.
You know, you got Pelosi who's introducing these bills, the coronavirus bills, with $800 billion that have nothing to do with coronavirus. Well, we got to compromise. And President Trump is like, no, we're not going to just pass bills that are for coronavirus that have all this extra fluff.
Have you ever tried to read a bill?
No, they're 700, huge. 800 pages long. What happened to just simple law? Boom.
It's because you can't twist it legally as easily when you are direct.
That should be a law. All laws need to be direct.
I vote for you.
You know what I mean? It's crazy.
I agree. Like that should be like the first, like at least like top 10 laws.
All right, so we are going way over right now. I want to move forward. I definitely wanted to read those out to you because that's happening in Florida. You know, Florida is actually cracking down, and that Polk County, the sheriff straight up said, like, don't come to Polk County. Like, our citizens are armed, and if you break into their house, I have, Castle Doctrine, I'm fully letting them know that they are armed and they will defend themselves, and they're for it.
Go chasing waterfalls.
Yeah.